Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Spiritual Insights with Charlotte Spicer. Spirituality and Metaphysics Talk Radio, featuring A Course in Miracles, dream interpretation, guided meditation, and the psychic and metaphysics free-for-all. It's your opportunity to consult with a professional psychic medium, discuss past lives, the chakras, and more. We are non-denominational, and there are no limits. Want to change your life? You must first change your mind. No matter your religious structure, cultivate peace in your reality through self-awareness with an authentic spiritual teacher. And now, your host, Charlotte Spicer.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Spiritual Insights. Thank you so much for tuning in. It is time, once again, for our monthly installment on A Course in Miracles with Robert Rosenthal, MD. Dr. Bob joins me on the second Thursday of each month at 3 p.m. Eastern to discuss topics from the perspective of A Course in Miracles. Additional commentary is frequently offered from Dr. Bob's book, From Plagues to Miracles. A student of A Course in Miracles since before it was even published, Dr. Bob was a close personal friend of Bill Thetford, Ph.D., who is the co-scribe of A Course in Miracles with Helen Schuckman and has served on the board of directors of the Foundation for Inner Peace, the publisher of the course since 1992. He's a board-certified psychiatrist in private practice near Princeton, New Jersey, and he authored the book From Plagues to Miracles, The Transformational Journey of Exodus from the Slavery of Ego to the Promised Land of Spirit. The book interprets the biblical story of Exodus. These segments are presented, if you're new to the show, they're presented in virtual class format. Dr. Bob will give a brief discourse, and after some discussion, listeners are invited to call in with their questions. Feel free to do so in the second half of the show. To learn more about the book and read excerpts, visit his website, FromPlaguesToMiracles.com. You can also connect with us on Facebook at From Plagues to Miracles, and, of course, on my page, Spiritual Insights Radio. Well, welcome back to the show, Dr. Bob. It's wonderful to be together again.
Thank you. And I realize if you're listening archived, this won't matter, but if you're listening live, this is not the second Thursday of the month. We had to jigger it this year, but
yes,
welcome.
We switched it.
Yep.
Oh, so how are you? I'm excited to talk about the topic today, which is about, of course, the ego mind, slave master, thief, and murderer. And like you said,
it really paints
we all have
a lovely picture. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
But it's in the figurative sense, absolutely, although sometimes these things can be quite literal in people's willingness to believe in their thoughts and their beliefs and those things that they hold to be true, not recognizing that they are delusional and that the illusion is that in order to control another person, I have to be more powerful, I have to do this, or stealing what we want from a relationship, be it stability or, you know what I mean, or even murder is a real fact in this chaotic world. And it's the ego that drives people to do that. So perhaps we'll touch on those a little bit. I know I want to talk a good bit about this chapter 1 and 2 in your book, which are phenomenal and clearly outline the mechanics of the ego. It's so easily digested when you read it from this perspective, especially since you are a psychiatrist. And
this is true.
And so what he did with the book, if you're new to the show, ladies and gentlemen, he took the story of Exodus from the Bible, the one where Moses goes to Pharaoh and tries to free the slaves, and broke it down symbolically, practically line by line, and it's phenomenal. And if you're a student of the course, or if you would like to be, it's my recommendation that you read From Plagues to Miracles first as a primer, and then get into A Course in Miracles, because the concepts are a bit complicated. But that's why Dr. Bob and I do these segments every month. So let me turn it over to you, Dr. Bob. Where would you like to begin?
Great. Well, since the show is about the ego mind, I'm going to begin with the idea of the ego and what is it. there's a lot of confusion about this because in the world of psychotherapy and psychiatry, ego is given a very different connotation than A Course in Miracles would give it, or than many spiritual paths would give it. So let's start there. The word ego itself is really kind of a scientific, highfalutin term for what Sigmund Freud called das Ich, which is in German the I. But when psychoanalysis was imported to the United States, they wanted to make it medicalized. It was only available to be practiced by physicians. So they took a lot of the common words that Freud used, the I, the it, being pushed back, and turned them into ego and id and repression. But so if you're talking to a psychotherapist, they're going to tell you, having a strong ego is a good thing. We want to take impulses and bind them so that, your ego is in charge and not your id or your superego. But that's not at all what we're talking about in the spiritual sense, because if we're looking at A Course in Miracles or any non-dual philosophy, what we come upon is that the I that we think of as us is not our true self. Now, pause and think about that for just a second. The you that's sitting here listening is not your true self. How can that be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me explain. So there are two ways that we can come at this, and A Course in Miracles tends to come at it from what I would call a top-down approach. That is to say, okay, we somehow separated ourselves from God. What got formed in that separation was the ego mind, and not even at the level of the individual like we all experience it, but almost this collective ego that knows only separation. It was born in separation, therefore all it can do is create more separation. It's a fragment, therefore all it can do is see things in terms of fragments. And this is, I think this is the deepest level of meaning of the phrase, by their fruits you shall know them. That you can't take something that's broken and fragmented and create wholeness out of that. It's simply impossible. But so from this top-down approach, we have something, this entity that is separate, that's separate from God, and yet God is everything. God is all. Therefore, that which thinks it's separate from God has to be an illusion. But this illusion goes about very fiercely and very assiduously trying to prove that it's real, and if it's real, then guess what? Can't be real. Because if God's real, then the ego has no place to go. So the ego's primary goal is autonomy. That is independence. That is, I don't need anyone or anything. Here in the United States, we see this played out in the myth of, the cowboy or the self-sufficient pioneer who can live off the land. We don't need anyone. Yet in point of fact, the ego is constantly so insecure that it's always trying to bolster up its frail sense of self by stealing from others, by comparing, by attacking. In fact, the characteristics of the ego would have to be attack and defense, judgment, specialness, comparison, anger. Not a very pretty compendium of traits if you really look at it. But the ego has to attack because it thinks that being separate from God, that God is attacking it. And I'm not going to go into all the ins and outs and of how that works, because as Shar and I were talking before this segment, we could spend probably a 3-day workshop just looking at the ego. But so, the ego is constantly in the process of bolstering its frail reality at the expense of spirit, at the expense of oneness. So that's the top-down view. The bottom-up view is what I like to, what I come at in From Plagues to Miracles, and that is to say, let's start where we are. We all think that we're a self. We all see ourselves as separate. You go outside, you wander the streets, you sit down with your family, you're seeing separate bodies, different personalities. That is the world that we live in. And we take that as just natural. We don't question it. So I like to start with that world and just begin to have us really look at it. I mean, the Course says in the chapter, The Dynamics of the Ego, which I listed, as a recommended reading, no one can escape from illusions unless he looks at them. For not looking is the way they are protected. In other words, we have to look at this. Now, that's different than the ego getting lost in analyzing itself and just, like a pig in mud, just having a great old time, who are we and what are we, without ever taking that the next step to, well, if ego is illusion, then only our spiritual nature is real. But if we start bottom up, then we can look at what the individual ego is, that is, the parts of us that we think constitute our self-concept, and from there begin to see how everyone creates one of these things for himself or herself. Everyone projects and creates them for someone else. In my psychiatry residency, we were absolutely taught to analyze someone else's ego. What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? What are the places that we can shore them up? But I think in this way, you'll get a much better sense of just how stuck we are, just how enslaved we are. Therefore, how do we know? How do we put together this thing we call our self-concept? And Shar was clear. This is all covered in the first and second chapters of my book. So our self-concept, as I understand it, is cobbled together from three different aspects of our seeming reality. And note, none of these are spirit. The first, which really comes right out of psychoanalytic thinking, is that we're a body. Our earliest experiences of life, well before language comes on the scene, really before we can even differentiate with our eyes or our ears what sights mean or what sounds mean, our first perception of self is a body self. We know when we're uncomfortable, we know when we're hungry, we know when we're cold or hot, and how our external environment responds to that already begins to condition our view of what we think the world we live in is. So, for example, if you're hungry and nobody picks you up and feeds you when you're 2 months old, and this happens consistently, you start to make associations, and again, this is all part of the ego mind, that, I don't get fed. My needs don't get seen or acknowledged or met, and that could result in a self that goes out in the world trying desperately to get seen and get his or her needs met, or it could result in a self that goes, screw it, there's no point, nobody ever does meet your needs, so I'm going to be completely autonomous and independent, and I'm not going to give back anything to anyone, why should I? But the body, the sense of the body is kind of the first pillar in what I like to call the three pillars of the ego mind. The second is what happens when language comes on board. We start developing language anywhere between 1 and 4 years of age. Albert Einstein apparently didn't talk till he was 5, but obviously he was exceptional. Language helps us further divide the world because now every single thing that we look at, hear, experience can be categorized through words. So I'm sitting here and I look out my window and I see trees and leaves and sky and clouds and grass. If you were in New York City and you'd be hearing sirens and cars and taxi horns honking, and if you looked out the window there'd be people walking. But we have names for all of these things. And notice, the moment we start looking at the world through the lens of language and names, we're splitting it up more. We're no longer seeing in wholeness. We're no longer feeling connected. We're standing apart from those objects and viewing them as not us. But this helps bolster our self-concept because, okay, I'm not a tree, I'm not a dog, I'm not the grass, I am my body. So language further reinforces that sense of separateness that is such a hallmark of the ego. But the mind, the ego mind, takes that even further and develops its own inner voice. And just about everyone I've talked to has had one of these. And it's that voice that sits up there in your head and talks to you day and night. Oh, yeah, we should do that. Oh, yeah, we better get prepared because Aunt Mary's coming and, she doesn't like a messy house, so I'm going to clean up the house here. Oh, that bill's coming. I wonder how I'm going to get it paid. The inner dialogue, only it's not a dialogue, it's a monologue. The inner voice doesn't want to hear back from you. It just wants to tell you what to do. This becomes identified with our sense of self. And in my own psychotherapy work, I try very hard to help people realize that voice is not them. It's amazing how critical that inner voice can be, and yet still how some people believe it's them. Oh, I'm so hard on myself. Well, no, it's some voice in you that you learned from somewhere else and took into your head that's being hard on some self-concept that you've woven together out of the body and your previous experiences. All of it is basically illusion. So this voice in our heads becomes the second pillar of self, using language to further divide us from the world, to separate us from other people, to compare and judge. I'm tall, he's short. Oh, I could probably beat him up, but she's a lot smarter than I am. She embarrasses me. I don't want to be around her. We start to categorize and build walls around this sense of self based on these comparisons. Obviously, this triggers emotions. It triggers shame. It can trigger anger. It can trigger fear. I'm seeing a scary dog, or fear, I can't pay my mortgage. They might come to take my house away. So the inner voice becomes a real tyrant. And I think if we're going to begin to look at the ego mind and our enslavement to it, that inner voice is often a very good place to start. But there is a third pillar of ego, and this is the one that that very few people identify. And if I hadn't had A Course in Miracles and a lot of training in memory and what goes into memory and false memories, I wouldn't have come at this either. And that is, the third pillar of ego is memory. That is to say, it's your life story. It's that sense that you are this continuous being who has lived your entire life out with a series of memories that you have held on to as being very, very much a part of you, formative to who you are. And yet, psychology shows us that memories are very, very changeable. In fact, the brain doesn't even remember. What the brain does is it recreates the memory chemically when you call it up. This is why those of us who are a little more senior in years, I'll think of a movie and I'll say to my wife, what was that movie with that guy and the plot? The brain takes a while to come up with, that was Glenn Close and Woody Harrelson or whatever. So memory gives us this illusion that we have continuity over time, and memory really creates this sense that we as a being, as a sense of self, occupy primarily the past and then project that past out into the future to see where we're going, but completely skirts over the present moment, which, if you've stopped to pay attention at any point, is the only time that any of us are ever living in. To me, this is the greatest hoax, the greatest cover that the ego pulls, is to make us believe that we're past and future, and the present, that's just this kind of way station where the future becomes the past. In point of fact, the present is all there is. We're always in an eternal present. My metaphor for this, and if you've listened to my talks before, I'm very, very fond of metaphor. My metaphor would be like going into a movie theater and actually believing that everything you're seeing on the screen is not only real, but you're there. So if you're, I was watching Homeland the other night. Oh, I'm in Pakistan, and, now I'm in the hills of Afghanistan. No, you're not any of those places. You're sitting there looking at a wall with a blank screen on it that has these projections going by that you have taken to be reality. This is what happens with the ego and our life story and the overlooking of the present moment. So these are the three pillars of ego, and when you put them together, you get a life story, a voice in your head that you've identified with you, giving you a running commentary on everything you're doing wrong, or if you're on the more narcissistic end of things, how wonderful and brilliant you are and how much better you function than everyone else, combined with a body that, if you're young, seems to work pretty great and you're really kind of enjoying it, but as you get older, stops working so well and becomes more a source of sickness, illness, infirmity. But the problem with the body, as we all know, no matter what age, is that eventually, it's going to die. And so here becomes the second point that completely undermines our self-concept and our ego self, which none of us want to look at, and that is that there is an end point. There is death. The ego is not eternal. The ego perishes with the body and the cessation of the mind. If we're identified with the ego, if we believe that we are it, then guess what? We're going to be terrified of death because death will mean the end of us. And at least in this regard, psychology has recognized how much of human behavior and human endeavor is about the denial of death and the avoidance of death. At least they're paying attention, unlike looking at the present moment, because psychology, puts the past on a pedestal, and I'm as guilty of this as anyone, looking at how our past contributed to who we are today. So the ego is a very unstable construct. Memory is changeable. It's going to die. It's rooted in the body, but the body, isn't really all too terribly trustworthy. The body, if you're a body, is always at some level worried about survival, and I imagine this was far worse in the past than it is now. But still, today we just equate money with survival. Am I going to have enough? Can I get to work? Could I be fired? Am I going to stay in good health? So the ego is kind of like this terrified, frightened child who pretends to be in control, pretends to have all the answers, attacks others and defends against others' perceived attacks in order to preserve its ego integrity. And yet, all the while, it doesn't really know who it is. A Course in Miracles tells us that the ego's motto is seek but do not find. Absolutely. The ego can never find, because the only thing that is worth finding, in a sense, the only truth that is out there is unavailable to the ego, and that is the truth of our real nature as no different than God, as son of God, as child of God. The ego can't get there any more than your shadow can become you. They're just different categories of existence. So let's take a little segue now. If this is our self-concept, how do we get out of it? Well, first, we have to realize that we're enslaved to it. And this is where I love the story of Exodus, because it so beautifully portrays the idea that you can be enslaved and not even realize that you're enslaved or that it's a bad thing. If the ego is your sense of self and the world out there is a real world that you are doing your darn best to just, get through and find a few pleasures here and there and avoid pain where you can, and the ego keeps you dancing and seeking and searching, and, well, that relationship didn't work out, but, there will be another one. I was a screenwriter. I'd write a screenplay, and, it would almost make it, well, that one didn't, but, the next one. That could be one of the ego's mottos. Next time we'll strike it rich. Next time we'll succeed. This is how slavery is preserved, and we're kept from ever stopping and going, ouch, this stinks. We're in pain. the operating system of the ego that we're using is not getting us the happiness, the sense of inner peace, the sense of abiding, continuous, abundant love that we want. It's just not there. One of my favorite lines from A Course in Miracles says, "Tolerance for pain may be high, but it is not without limit." Eventually, everyone must recognize that there must be a better way, and I'm paraphrasing it, obviously. In other words, the older you get, the more you begin to realize that all of those things that looked so good and so attainable when you were in your early 20s, either you haven't gotten there and you realize you're never going to get there, you're not going to be president, who would want to be, or you got there and you got them and they didn't satisfy you in the way you thought they would. So at a certain point, the ego's game is exposed, and at that point we can wake up to our enslavement. And Chapter 2 of From Plagues to Miracles goes into all of the various ways that we are enslaved. We're enslaved to our possessions. We're enslaved to our desire for money. We're enslaved to our bodies, both for their sense of beauty and to avoid sickness and infirmity. We're enslaved to time because we think that, there's never enough. And that's true in the course of a day. 24 hours, not nearly enough. No time to sleep, no time to get done all we need to do. Can hardly check your emails in that space of time. But at the same time, it's not enough because we're going to die at the end. But most of all, we're enslaved to relationships. We're enslaved to the roles we play. I think it's a very useful exercise, and I won't do it right now, but perhaps sometime today or sometime in the week ahead, just sit down and get out a piece of paper and write down all of the various roles that you have taken on as part of your self-concept. Father, mother, husband, wife, son, daughter, employee, the funny one, the sad one, the victim, the innovator, the comedian. Everybody has multiple roles and identities that they wear, but we seldom pause to really look at them because each one of them, it is just a role, and as any actor can tell you, a role comes to an end when the play is over. Behind the role, who are you? When you take off the mask of that role, who are you? So all of these are the ways in which we allow ourselves to be enslaved. What's the way out of slavery? Well, Exodus tells us we can't find that ourselves. The Hebrew people who are us in the parable of Exodus, they never rise up against Pharaoh. They never say, what are we doing here? We have our own land, the promised land where we belong. No, they need someone who is of their lineage, Moses, but who also knows freedom and who is connected to God in a much more direct and personal way to say, let me lead you out of here. So each one of us also has on our mind the Moses mind, as From Plagues to Miracles calls it, or the Holy Spirit, or the Christ mind. I really don't care what words we give it. Remember, words are just the ego's ways of labeling and creating judgments. So, if I'm Christian and I hear, it's the Allah mind, whoa. I mean, I've actually heard people say, they don't believe in our God, they believe in Allah. It's just different names for the same God, obviously. I just lost track of my thought. But anyway, the way out is already instilled in us because it's our true nature. The ego is like this, like the clouds that float across a beautiful clear sky. They take on all these different forms. They look like castles. They look like clowns. They look like dancing bears, what have you. And you could get lost in them and in that panoply of forms, and that's the world we live in. But behind it is always the same perfectly clear, perfectly transparent and translucent oneness of the sky. And that is what the Christ mind, the Moses mind is about, is getting in touch with that. That's why meditation is such a powerful tool in spiritual disciplines, because when we meditate, we recognize that inner voice of the ego is static. is chatter. And when it comes up, we just gently let it go. We recognize that all of those concerns and fantasies, all of the desires and lusts and fears that parade through our mind are just that. They're static, and we let them go. And as we get better and better at that process, as we learn to do that with more and more skill and can just sit in the space of quiet, what the Bible calls the peace that passeth understanding, we begin to recognize that that's our true self, that's our identity, and that is eternal and timeless. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali use the metaphor of a lake that when you reach down and stir up the mud in the bottom, you get all this debris and cloudy murk in the middle, and you can no longer see the bottom of the lake. You can't see the foundation. But if you get still and you let all of that settle, then the water clears again, and once you can see right through it to the bottom. I think that's a lovely metaphor, and obviously it's stood the test of time of centuries and centuries. So we want to wake up to our enslavement to the ego. We want to recognize that the ego is indeed a murderer, in that it wants us dead, it believes in death. It's terrified of death, but secretly it courts it. It is a thief. It's constantly trying to borrow from others to bolster itself and to borrow from the world to prove that it's really worthwhile and has something. And it is very definitely a slave master, because in going through those processes, it enslaves us to a sense of self that isn't real and keeps us from embracing and experiencing our true oneness, which when you touch base and touch into it is absolutely wonderful, resplendent. There is literally nothing in this world that is the like or that's equivalent to it. This world does not offer any experience that comes close to the truth. It can't, because it's not true. I guess the final thing that I would offer is the idea that the Hebrews are enslaved in Egypt and they want to get to the promised land. The world of ego is Egypt. It's the world of slavery. If you have seen the movie The Matrix, this is, again, another lovely metaphor. I would skip the second and third movies in the series, but the first one is well worth your while if you can overlook all of the violence. But that idea that, we're walking around in a facsimile world that has absolutely no reality. And indeed, even from a neurophysiological standpoint, there is no way to prove that there is a world out there. What do I mean by that? Well, what you think you are seeing, science will tell you, is just, nerve impulses being transmitted by the cells of your retina, which are sensitive to light and motion, and they transmit the impulse up into the lower part of your brain, the lateral geniculate, which then goes up into the upper brain, and we assemble all of these things and construct a reality out of it. But there really is no proof that there's a reality there. When you take people from third world countries who've never watched television, and I don't know whether this would hold true with the modern big screen TVs, the LCDs and plasmas, but when they were pixel TVs, it certainly was true. If you showed them a TV screen, they wouldn't see an image on there. We have to learn to see that, because all of those tiny dots and pixels don't necessarily get assembled into one coherent image of something that we recognize. It takes time to learn that. People who are blind from birth with cataracts, when they get cataract surgery, they don't immediately see the world that we're seeing. This is the process of ego formation that happens as we grow up and we have language and we identify that, this is where my body ends and this is where the chair begins and the desk begins. So even from a materialistic science standpoint, there really is no world out there. It could all just be your own very complex fantasy. Me talking to you here, it could be a complete figment of your imagination. But if so, it's a figment that wants you to wake up. And the only reason to understand ego is to be able to see its machinations, identify them as they're happening, and, as the Course says, realize there really is a better way. and then begin to practice that. And as we practice it, we discover this other identity that I was talking about. Okay, enough for today. Shar, let me turn it over to you for thoughts, addendums, insights, wherever you want to go, my dear.
Well, it's funny because I was, I like to jot notes as you're talking and write down different things you say so I can reference them. And most of what I wrote down, you kind of mentioned in your summary. So it's funny. it's I always
Sorry
get a kick
that.
out of this. No, it's perfect because it shows the connectedness. You're in New Jersey, I'm in Florida, and we don't get a chance to say, what do you want to talk about? We just go, and then you give your discourse. I make my little notes, and there have been instances where I'm writing the words as you say them, and it's a simultaneous thing. So just to demonstrate to the listeners that this process is equally fascinating for us because of the way it works. But when I had,
we're all one mind.
We are. We really are. And I love that you ended on the note that you did about reality, because what I wrote was that reality is not rooted in science and molecular structure. In the world of form, it is truth that illuminates the reality of our beliefs, fears, and situations. And then you segued into, well, how do we get out of this? And I loved everything you said about it, because to overcome the separateness, I often say, see others as a spark of light. Try to get beyond the curtain and the limitations of skin and eyes and behavior, especially. And I wanted to reference, suppose you're confronted with something. You say, okay, well, this world's an illusion. Okay, most people can understand that to a pretty decent degree. But let's talk about an instance where you're in an argument with another person for whatever reason. And then you're confronted, and it's right in your face, and you say, how can this not be real? And then it's this heated, intense experience. But if you manage to pull back, and I say, open your spiritual sight and look at this person as a spark of light, a child of God, a brother or sister, or even in a physical sense as an innocent baby. You can see all of those behaviors and see where they're coming from. I think it's the shock that we experience, and asking that question, like, where is this coming from? It's all coming from fear, and if you listen to them with your heart and see them with your spiritual sight, you will see that they are just afraid, and all of the accusations that come at you, all of the projections, they're really just cries for help. And if we look at that, then the circumstance is easier to navigate. I mean, is there reality to, the world of form? Well, yeah, and that's what science has figured out. Here's how it all works. Here's how this impacts this, and that's all well and good. But when it comes to the ego, and as you put it, it's the operating system we use to navigate life in the world around us. And you go on to say, in fact, it's the only obstacle to remembering our true self in God. That is the only thing that's in our way, because in your book, and then in A Course in Miracles, it goes deeply into the concept that we can never be far from our Creator, and our will is always in accordance with His. It's the ego that tries to convince you otherwise, and this is the very source of any type of dissatisfaction. And you had mentioned towards the end of your discourse, it keeps you dancing, it keeps you seeking, it keeps you, reaching. And I wrote down, and it also keeps you dissatisfied, and that is its trick. Because you would think once you get to the top of that mountain and you get that expensive car or that lovely home or the partner that you want, why do you not experience peace other than for a brief amount of time in which you experience a euphoria, which I translate as the ego's sense of triumph over the world because of its fear? And then it's kind of a state of awe, which is totally of the ego. It's kind of like, I didn't think I could do it, but I pulled it off, and now I'm in awe of this triumph. And you have this euphoria, and then after a while you get used to the idea, and then it dissipates. And then you look for something else to chase after. But I know I've said it before, but I'll say it again. One of my favorite lines in the book, because it's so succinct, is the ego will forever have you chasing what it does not want you to find. And this,
beautiful.
And this is, and I repeat it so often because it really slammed home for me the concept that God is not against me. Anything that's happened in my life that I'm not happy with, I brought on myself. Whether you go to the metaphysical side and say, we attract the experiences that we most need to learn, we summon those who will be our teachers, or whether you go with the ego versus the higher self, that God has always been there. He's always been my friend, and my will has always been in accordance with his. I wanted peace. That is my will. But my ego said that the only way to peace was to get that job or get a better car or, buy a home and do all these things that reinforce and support my beliefs about myself, in my self-concept. That
exactly.
I am worthy of something or someone through acquisition. And it's just such a, I have to watch my language. It's a real trick of the mind, it's a real mind scramble. Let me say mind scramble. Because look at what we do to ourselves. Look at what we do to others in our quest for peace and happiness. But if we just relax and let that tape that plays every day, all day, which is only a reflection of the inner workings of the mind. I need to remember to do this, and I can't seem to remember to forget that. To forget that it happened, to forget the way that person made me feel. I can't seem to forget. And like you said, the body's the only thing that can live in the present. The mind can go in either direction, the past and the future, often simultaneously, both, because it also says in the Course, you look upon your past and think that you see your future in its remains. That it's not the case. Or maybe that's not in the Course in Miracles. Maybe that was said directly to me. But either way, it's another one of those statements that's embedded in my mind to help me get myself out of those inky blue spells so that the thoughts and the desires and the fantasies that you mentioned, when we become a slave to them, that is when we allow it to bring us down and descend into depression and a manic, voracious appetite for power and money and things that don't matter. What matters is love. What matters is truth. And those of us who can get over the intensities of our ego, there is no size. We often say, oh, that person's got a big ego. It's not so much about size. It's about intensity. But once we learn how to simmer that intensity down and get into that quiet space where we do know God and we know our true selves, that is when we allow peace to happen. And I liked what you said about people being like frightened children, because that pretty much sounded like most of the people I've worked with, just these frightened people running around. It's crazy. But that's, largely the ideas that I had in my head. You answered one of the questions I had, how to get out of it. You say at the end of Chapter 1, In From Plagues to Miracles, I like the way you put this. Therefore, when we read Exodus as a parable of the mind, we must start by asking what slavery means for us today. In what ways are our minds in bondage? For if we cannot recognize the chains around our own minds, we will have no hope of escaping. And I didn't get a chance to tell you or ask you. I know you've been busy. You just recently you got off an airplane. But I thought, well, this would be a great segment where we put together an exercise for people to complete. I love giving assignments, self-exploratory assignments. So if at a later time you want to put a questionnaire together, and then we can publish it on our respective websites for people just to make it a little more concise for them and give them a direction. But I had wanted to do that, and you mentioned, get a piece of paper, sit down, and just look in the chapters in A Course in Miracles that you recommended for the suggested reading, Chapter 7, Section 6, and Chapter 11, Section 5. There's such practical information in those chapters on how to get out of the racing maniacal mind. So I totally recommend that everybody really just take a look. But I think my point was, in those sections, it makes it clear. Most of us are afraid to look at what we're afraid of because we think it's real.
And it makes clear that the ego wants that the ego needs to keep us afraid, because if we look squarely at it, we're going to see that it's nothing. So, as you said, there's somewhere in one of the chapters it says the ego needs to minimize fear but not eliminate it, because it can't eliminate it. It's based on fear. But if we fully experienced just how terrifying it was, then there wouldn't even be a question. We'd drop it and re-embrace our spirit self in an instant.
Mhm. And it talks about, to look at it and see that there's nothing there. That's all that's going to happen. Because when you look at it with the light, it's like looking in a room for looking in a dark room for the shadows. And you say, well, I don't see anything. I can't find the shadows. And then you turn the light on and you say, well, there are no shadows. No, they're not. They're because you cast the light on it. So if you have a problem in your life, if you have a relationship that is in conflict for whatever reason, take that issue and hold it up to the light. Because we're focusing on the shadows cast by whatever is presenting and looming in front of us as conflict, as lack, as self-loathing. Look at these things. Take a good look at it and just allow yourself to let it go. I also love how you said, there's the Patanjali, I think it was, in the reference to stirring the muck at the bottom of the pond. Yes, when that sediment settles back down and you have this artificial peace, but you still have the sediment, I always say, be willing to stir it up. It's not pretty. It's not fun. And there will be many tears shed. But be willing to stir it up, if only for the purpose of letting it go. And the more you do that, the less murk there is, and the clearer the pond, and equate the pond with the state of your heart, the state of your mind. Allow peace in, because you've let those things go, and they're no longer in the element. You are truly whole. It's the concept that we are separate, that life happens to us, that perpetuates the ego's goal, which is, fear to keep you captive. And that's what we don't want.
Yeah.
I hope that was coherent.
I don't think mine was coherent. I think we covered it all, though, and did it very, very well. Just as a sort of an addendum or a coda, if we recognize that the external world really isn't there, it's a projection of our mind. A Course in Miracles says projection makes perception, or the world is, a mirror, not a fact. Then anything that happens to us is a potential learning experience. So when you were talking about, getting into an argument or a conflict with someone, and and you just feel like they've completely dissed you, and you want to rip them a new one or whatever, to the extent that you look at that as they're out there and you're over here and you're right and they're wrong, there is no learning value in that. But when you do this radical reframe that everything that happens is either love and peace, or it's showing you a spotlight where you are perceiving a world that is not at love and peace, and therefore, by shining a spotlight on it, it's allowing you to peer into your own self where you need to do inner work. In that sense, it's a gift. I've been lately trying to, look at things that disturb me as in the same way I would look at, walking down the street and finding a $100 bill. Wow, look at this. This is great. I just found this amazing thing. If there's a driver who's pissing me off, or I see someone talking on TV and, my ego mind goes, what an idiot. I can't believe he's saying that. I can pull back, pause, and go, oh, wait a minute. This is showing me a place where I'm locked in judgment, where I believe that I know better than, my experience is somehow more worthwhile. But most of all, it's showing me a place where I'm not at peace. The reasons that we come up with are ultimately just ego mind reasons. The only reason we're ever not at peace is because we've believed we're an ego and we've blocked love out of our experience. Mm-hmm. So any place where there's conflict, adversity, sadness, shame, fear, anger, you name it, each one of those simply becomes an opportunity to look within and make a course correction. In the Exodus story, this is what, and if there is a core to Exodus, this is it. This is what the whole 10 plagues thing is all about. When we go through life and experience the world as an ego, identified with the ego mind, we will encounter adversity, hardships, that is to say, plagues. The Pharaoh of Exodus, the embodiment of the ego mind, this being that thinks it's the ruler and king of the known universe and more powerful than anyone. Oh, but it doesn't know God, by the way, because Pharaoh says that directly. This incredible being is going to stumble into one hardship after another, and it can't correct any of them. Pharaoh, for all of his prowess and his magicians and his, great engineers, he can't undo even the first plague. And so each time he goes sort of scurrying back, okay, well, maybe I'll do this, maybe I'll do that. But the ego mind really can't make the only change that counts, and that is the change that says, I'm not an ego, I'm not a body, I am as God created me. The ego is not as God created me. So Pharaoh can't get to the promised land. Pharaoh's not really a human being. It's a representative of the ego mind. But for us, wherever there's a plague in our life, someone who's really just floored us, a situation that's blown our minds, it's an opportunity to look within. And and if it's happening to you, then there it is. It must be. You must be ready and ripe for it. Sometimes it doesn't seem that way, and we can look around and look at other people's experiences and use them to make judgments. I'll often think about people who've lost a child, and I can't imagine what that would be like. And and you can get into a whole inner death spiral of thought. Oh, if that happened, I'd just commit suicide, whatever. But unless it's in your experience, then it isn't really worthwhile for you to think of it. And if it is in your experience, then you have indeed taken on quite a challenge. But the loss, even of a child, is not the same as the loss of love. There is still love in you. There is love in the planet, and it can be brought forward. But one other thought, and then I'll back off again here. According to A Course in Miracles, the Moses mind, Holy Spirit, will never bring us intentionally into fear. That's what the ego likes to do. The ego is the one who goes, well, how about Hitler? What would we do with him? Can we really forgive Hitler? Or the ego is the one who goes, well, but if you're on a plane and the terrorists have hijacked it and it's crashing to the ground, how are you going to feel about spirit then? The ego can paint one nightmare after another that terrifies us and causes us to completely just flee from our sense of our spirit-mindedness. But what A Course in Miracles says is that you will get what you are ready for if you are indeed on the spiritual path and working it in that way. Another one of my favorite lines, don't fear, you will not be hurled into reality. Because that is what we fear. As egos, we're afraid, oh man, if we let God in, God's just going to overwhelm this and we're going to die. Isn't that what will happen if we have no body? We're going to die. No, we can't let God in. I don't want to die. Well, no, you don't really die. What happens is you let go of your body, which I'm told is kind of like taking off a tight glove at the end of the day, but the actual essence of you doesn't die. But in going through life with a consciously spiritual focus, we are told that we will never intentionally be brought into fear. And I can tell you from my own life that that there are plenty of places where I thought things were going wrong that in retrospect were absolutely correct for my life path. If any one of my screenplays had sold, I would be in Hollywood right now, and I wouldn't be here, and I wouldn't be teaching A Course in Miracles. And I know I would much rather be here than there. We get a customized, perfect fit curriculum for our own spiritual learning path. It couldn't be more appropriate for you. Someone else will get a different one that's more appropriate for them. That's why comparison is ultimately completely meaningless. The only thing that has any meaning is walking your path, seeing those places where the plagues come up, the adversities, the conflicts, recognizing that they're there to help shine a light on your ego self and allow you to cross over that Red Sea into your real self, your Moses mind, your Christ mind, and to keep doing that until, I guess, those episodes stop showing up. And at that point, you're teaching others how to do it. But so, yeah, it's not that we're never going to encounter these things, because we will. It's just that whenever we do, we can understand it from a very different perspective, and work as quickly as we can to heal that which within us, which sees the conflict, which experiences the conflict, and get back to love, which is our true nature. Teach only love, for that is what you are, says A Course in Miracles. Was that clear?
Oh my God, it was beautiful. It's hard to even, it's like, what icing can I possibly put on that? But you're correct. And let me just jot a note before I lose my thought. I hate when that happens.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. And yes, I just to reinforce what you said, you really can't correct anything but your perceptions and intentions. We can attempt to resolve a problem or a situation, but until we correct our perception of it, it will never truly be resolved. It'll just be modified. And I also wanted to, make the statement, as long as you're in a body, you have an ego. And as long as
yes.
because that's where the ego lives,
Yes.
The kingdom of heaven is in the heart. God, allow him into your mind, or the Holy Spirit, or Jesus, or Allah, or Buddha, whoever you have to lean on. Let them into your mind. Ask to see through their eyes, hear through their ears, and that's another point I wanted to make. Don't draw conclusions, like Dr. Bob said. It's all about suspending your judgment. What good or bad, when we determine something to be good or bad, likable or not pleasant, those are judgments. If you suspend judgment, pull back, and just observe it and ask for guidance on every situation, you'll be that much better off. Because as long as you're on this planet, there will be situations to deal with. But if you can look at them clearly and see others through the eyes of God, and see them for who they really are, and operate from the higher self, which is not in this world. The ego is in this world. The higher self is above. Yep. It's with God, and that's how I always see it. I see it as like if you see a person, and then heaven technically is 3 feet over your head, but imagine it even further, and imagine a string that goes to your higher self, and then your higher self is never not in touch with God at any point. What happens is this little cloud called the ego clouds your vision, clouds your thoughts, clouds your mind, and you can have vision or you can have judgment, according to A Course in Miracles, but you cannot have both.
Yeah.
So you
must
remember,
choose. Judgment is always based on the past. What can you judge except what you've experienced before? And the moment you're judging based on your past, you're basically repeating your past. You're giving it the status of ultimate reality,
yes.
And therefore your future is going to show up exactly like your past. So in that equation, there is no room for change. So we have to be able to suspend the past, or at the very least recognize it as, okay, that was a source of plagues and I don't want that anymore in order to go forward.
Exactly.
A prayer from the Course in Chapter 14 that I use all the time goes as follows. I do not know what anything, including this, means. That is, this being whatever circumstance you find yourself in. I do not know what anything, including this, means, and so I do not know how to respond to it, and I will not use my own past learning as the light to guide me now. You know, if that's beginner's mind in the Buddhist framework, you are allowing each experience to come to you fresh with no preconceptions, nothing from the past. And in that way, your vision is clear, and what you're likely going to see is just the light of God, the light of spirit and oneness wherever you look.
Yes. You'll see a true reflection rather than a repetition of what you disliked or were afraid of in the past, because the more you go back there, you're putting more energy into it, stealing it from the present, and your future is created in the present based on everything you hold in the subconscious mind. It's crazy.
Exactly.
But we have a listener who would like to participate in the conversation.
Okay.
Dr. Bob, so I'm going to bring him live on the air. Bringing you on the air, area code 469. Hi, welcome to the show.
Yes, hello. I love this. This is just what I need at this particular time.
Thank you so much. What is your name, ma'am?
Yes, my name is Stacy.
Stacy. And
hi, Stacy.
What would you like to say or ask?
I would like to say and ask, okay, you know how it is when we always say, we always have been taught to go outside of ourselves and trust outside or know from outside or give from outside. We never thought to give unto ourselves or trust our own inner being. And my question is, not a question, let me add. I had to get to a point where I realized it had got to a point where I stopped trusting my husband. And I realized it wasn't my husband that I was not trusting. I had developed that mind against him. So it's not so much that I was distrusting him. I got to the point where it's like I was trusting the negative mind that I built against him, which I can say the system that was putting there. Some people call it the ego. I call it the system. And I recognized, I got to the point to where when I started, because I appreciate the ego. I appreciate the system because there's so much that I can learn from that. As long as I'm in tune with that higher self, it'll kind of tell me what it's about and why it needs to be done on this plane. And so when I started trusting the higher self, then I recognized it was the ego in me. It was the part of me that I distrusted, was the part that was really trying to get to me to let me know there were some things about me that I had not trusted. No, that I was trusting that I shouldn't have trusted about myself. So it didn't want it to be exposed, so it started blaming my spouse. Oh, my God, I so love this book. I love this show. This is so on point. But, and you see where I'm going with it? And it's like it's just hitting it's hitting everything. And sometimes I will fall back into this hole. It's like this hole is waiting on me to fall back in it. It's like if I put myself back in this situation, because there are times it's like if he was to come, if I was to go and kiss him, he would act like I'm just so like, oh, he just hates the very presence of me when I go and kiss him. But what it is that it's my higher self not being able to tap into myself and understand why that is. That's still that false place in me. It's like he's trying to trust genuine love, or is it me trying to bash him out because he's not kissing me back? You see what I'm saying?
There you go.
So I so get it. I mean, I really get it. Now, staying on that pathway is very, very difficult when you start trusting that ego. When you start trusting that thing, you have built such a communication with it, but it's lies.
Well, so with your husband, if he's not comfortable kissing you back, what does that show? Well, that means he's not comfortable with love. So if he's not comfortable with love and you choose to meet it with lack of love on your end, great. Now we got two people, neither of whom can bring love into the picture,
exactly.
and that
right.
Yep, and that can't go anywhere good.
It's
Whereas
right.
Go ahead.
It hasn't always been that way. It was always He put me so high at the pedestal to where it's like I needed to knock me down because I didn't want to have to walk that tightrope. I didn't want to be up in that place because realize he put himself up there, and when he falls, I'm going to fall with him. You follow me? It's like, put me up there.
That's the problem with pedestals.
Yes, exactly. So the thing about it is now I am to where he was so used to me bringing this love and affection to where it's like now he's trying to see who's this coming because I taught him to see that way based on how I treated him. I was teaching him this stuff. So now I had to get to the point to where, I cannot afford for anyone, especially us, to fall off from the mishap of me knowing my true self. That's what I have to give. Because if I don't get my true self, I'm going to really receive the part of me that I don't want. And I so get it. You need to broadcast. You need to put this on television so everybody can hear this. This is a beautiful class.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome.
You are so well spoken, and you so get it. The only thing I want to point out, because I know you see so clearly, and even for that time where I'm doing it again, and you have to pull yourself out of that. It took me a little while, but I got really good at it. Look at the length of time it takes you from that cloudy perception to get back to a clear perception and peace. Because you'll notice the more you practice this, and your husband is your best teacher, so the more often you practice it, the shorter and shorter the amount of time where you stay there. Get back to peace as quickly as possible. That's so true. If it takes you 3 days, that's not bad. But if it can take you 20 minutes or less, you're on it. You're on it. You have the ego conquered.
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I would add is in our quote unquote love relationships, the concept of specialness becomes so important. And when I said that the ego is also a thief, this is really what I was thinking most is we feel like we have to sort of steal from the other person what we are lacking in ourselves. Ultimately, that's the lack of love, but we see it in different forms. Well, I'm not strong. I can't tell people what I think. He can, or he's seeing the same in you. But the problem is thieves always are afraid they're going to be stolen from because that's the world they live in. It's a world of thievery. So that sense of scarcity and lack is always going to be there. The moment either of you, and in this case you, goes to, I can hold love no matter what happens. That is my being. That is my essence. That is my only reality. Then the other person, in a sense, they can't stay in a place of lack because they can't steal love from you. You're giving it. It's the nature of love to give itself. And you never run out. So you're not in lack, and then they're not either.
And it's so funny you said that because I had told him some years back. I said, when you really think about it, if love is energy, it's just like electricity. You can't give it and you can't take it. You can only plug into it. I said, and if we're supposed to be God, if we're supposed to be the God from the God, all creator, and beyond that, if we're supposed to be that and we come from that energy, then I can't give you love and you can't give me love. So your love is because you're God, you can do whatever you choose with it. So if you choose not to use the energy, then to me that's still love. That's still okay. And he's like, well, how is that? I said, no, think about it. It's okay. If you choose not to do anything with the energy, you're the God. You can do what you choose to do. But if I choose
and the energy is still going to be there. It's not going to change. And when you change your mind about it, then it's still there waiting for you.
Oh, you're going to make me cry. This is so beautiful.
She really fits in, huh?
Beautiful.
Have you ever studied A Course in Miracles? Have you ever heard of it?
No, I haven't. Only thing I study is myself. I had to even stop studying books. I had to stop studying everything because it started altering my thoughts. And I got away from all of that stuff. So now I just study me, and I study other humans, and I study dirt. I look at it and ask questions.
I do, too. Here's the freaky thing, aside from brilliance of this entire conversation, That's what I had to do. I remember it was in the late 90s. I remember walking past A Course in Miracles on a bookshelf in a store at 3rd and Chestnut in Philadelphia. Is at the right end. I see what I'm wearing, okay? And I touched it. And I said no, and I walked away. And then it came back into my life when I was 33, which was in 2001. And one of the greatest things I found was the way it validated that all the time I spent studying myself, my pain, my situations, the abuse, whatever, is that, like you, I managed to figure some of these things out, and then the things that I didn't, it dropped it right into the gaps. So if you were to get into this book, it would blow you away at how much you figured out on your own.
That's good.
You know what I mean?
I agree.
Brilliant. It's a life changer. And that's why we're so into this. Dr. Bob was there before it was published, so he really, has a grasp on it. But the reason we're it is because it helps people change their minds so it can change your life.
Yeah, I agree with that. Oh, wow. This is good. This is the first time I'm listening to your show, Black Class. I will go back and listen to this. I think I'm going to follow you because I love this. Is good.
Please do.
Well, thank you.
We have a lot of great stuff coming. You can also go to my website, spiritualinsightsradio.com, and I have all of our classes together in a list. You just click on what you want to do. You go to Dr. Bob's website, fromplagues2miracles.com. Absolutely read his book. But if you get a copy of A Course in Miracles, it contains lessons, one for every day of the year. And that helps you break the ego down, restructure the mind. In life. Dr. Bob, you explain the lessons to her because I'm at a loss for words. I'm so blown away.
Well, I think the idea is, you said it yourself. This is very hard work to do. It's hard to sort of stay vigilant for spirit. Every moment. I don't know anyone who can do that. But by using a structure, a format of every day you wake up and do a lesson, and each lesson is different, it kind of gives you a focus for that day and reminds you that whatever happens in the course of that day, it's all grist for the mill because your ultimate goal is to wake up to the God in you, to the love in you, to the spirit in you.
I agree.
Yeah. But there are many paths. The Course is certainly my path, but the Course itself says it's just one among many, and, we have to follow our own inner guidance. That's the most important thing, and if your inner guidance is telling you that right now you just want to do your own life and not read anything, then you do that. And if at some point you're walking along and a book falls on your head, well, maybe that's what you do then.
Yes, and I do allow energy to do me that way. Don't get me wrong. If something does, I'm going to pick it. I'm going to examine it. But really, it's like looking at something is almost like examining myself, because even your way of thinking has a lot to do with mine. It's still and I look at things. I had to stop looking at me as an individual, and I didn't know what that was. Now I know what it is. I just don't want to see myself as an individual. I really don't.
That's beautiful.
I did it one time. I did, and it seemed like it's so selfish. It is so selfish of beings to be considered an individual. You're not. How can you be an individual? But anyway.
And it's also not true. You're not an individual. Your body is individual, but your body is not you. And that is the insight that, we all have to come to eventually. Love your brother as yourself. He, she, they are you.
Right. And
all right.
Yes. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
I just want to mention, though, when you were talking about your husband, it made me kind of smile because I had to learn, without much trouble, but my husband is the sweetest guy on the planet. But there was things he was doing that I would say, excuse me, I need to go look at this. I'm having a reaction, and go into another room and say, okay, where's this coming from? And of course, anything anybody does in front of you in the present is going to hit a button, but the button's from the past. So keep in mind that your husband's behavior, attitude, or words are reminding you of something from your past. In my case, my husband reminds me of my mother. So I have to work with that on a daily basis, and forgiveness happens in layers. And we'll be doing this for all of our lives, you know. But it doesn't matter to God when we get it, only that we do. And that's the important thing to remember.
And see, he reminds me of the person that I don't want to be, and that's me. He's doing the things that I don't want done. That's the thing, you know, and it's like I don't like this stuff about me, and my husband is a catalyst for it. He is such a catalyst for it. He's
so what do you need?
What a remarkable teacher he is.
Yes, and what do you need to do for yourself in order to resolve this? What do you need to do? I want to hear you say.
You know what? What I really need to do is embrace that other side of me. I really do.
Thank you.
I don't like it, but I need to embrace it. Yeah, I really do, because I am the one that always want to know what was a male and female before it was split. What was night and day before it was split? I want to see things in its wholeness. I'm tired of seeing separation. Even Jesus and the devil, what were they when they were born soul? What was it? And that has been my search for how many years? I think I come back down to this, and I still haven't got it, but I feel it. And something tells me, but you do know it. You do know. You're actually living it, and you're not aware of. You're actually living what you have asked. And it's like, it ain't hit me yet. It just haven't hit me. But I want to see it in its wholeness. Black and white before it was split, it's not gray. It was something else before it was split. And I want that. That's what I want right there. I see
wholeness
it.
And unity. Yeah.
Whew, goodness gracious. Makes me cry.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well.
But I'm
you nailed it. I love it.
Yes.
I'm gonna
Thank
stay back
you so
and
much
listen
for calling
more.
into the show
you're
and
welcome.
adding to the conversation. It was absolutely beautiful.
Yes, thank you.
We need to make a few more statements and then move on, but join us. Do follow the show, visit the websites, click on the links in the show description. We would love to have you on board.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Thank you, Stacy. God bless. Wow. That's brilliant. But we're running out of time, and I didn't want to get cut off.
Yep. And you had a prayer that you wanted to do, I believe?
I do. I love ending with the prayer. So just to let everybody know. Okay. And for December, our next segment will definitely be on the second Tuesday of the month.
Yes.
And on my website, spiritualinsightsradio.com, I have all the segments listed. You can go there and check them out and listen to our past segments. I will also be replaying over the next couple of months most of our segments as well. And do you have anything coming up, Dr. Bob, that you want everyone to know about?
Yeah, although it would be limited. If you live in the New York, New Jersey area, I am going to be doing the service at the Unity Church in Unity Spiritual Center in Pattenburg, New Jersey, which is off of I think it's I-80, and that will be followed by a workshop on From Plagues to Miracles. Will be not so much going through the book, but doing a little bit of what we talked about today, looking at who we think we are, how our egos are formed, and then what is that journey forward through plagues to miracles in order to remember our wholeness. So if you're interested in that, I would, do an internet search for, Unity Spiritual Center, Pattenburg, New Jersey, or go to my website, although I haven't posted it yet. I've been that busy that I have not posted this yet, but it will be up there. But it should be a good Sunday. That would be on Sunday, December 7th. And then, of course, we'll have our next show on Thursday, the 11th.
Absolutely. Okay. And his website, one more time, is FromPlaguesToMiracles.com. Look for that notification. Okay. So what we like to do is we like to end the show with a prayer that I am taking from, called Choose Once Again, Selections from A Course in Miracles, published by the Foundation for Inner Peace. Dr. Bob, thank you once again for an absolutely electric discussion. I absolutely had a blast.
It was a good one.
Unbelievable.
Thank you. Me too.
Yes. Okay. So I'm gonna recite the prayer, and then we'll leave it at that. This
Yes.
appears on page 10 of Choose Once Again. Be in my mind, my Father, when I wake, and shine on me throughout the day today. Let every minute be a time in which I dwell with you, and let me not forget my hourly thanksgiving that you have remained with me, and always will be there to hear my call to you and answer me. As evening comes, let all my thoughts be still of you and of your love. And let me sleep, sure of my safety, certain of your care, and happily aware I am your son. Amen.
Amen.
Until next time, everyone, God bless and be at peace.